One day, nearly 30 years ago, an outdoorsman decided to try real caving in Tennessee's deepest underground pothole, Bull Cave. He found himself severely unprepared for the dangers of the underground waterfall within. On the way out, he had to battle for his own life as rescuers bravely fought to save him. This is the story of the Bull Cave Rescue.
Before we dive into today's video, make sure to hit the bell icon so you don't miss any updates. We upload daily. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and join our amazing community. Now, let's get started.
In the early summer of 1990, a 23-year-old man named John departed on a trip into Bull Cave. He was new to splunking and he was already hooked. John was supposedly an outdoorsman who hiked along the woodland trails of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. His travels took him to show caves, heavily modified caves equipped with lights and other amenities for staff-guided tours, the kinds of caves families visit on RV trips across the USA. Usually only beautiful caves or short caves with wide-open passages are chosen to become show caves. These caves need great attractions, like the 3,121 square feet of over 200 million cave pearls in Gruta de las Canicas, the flowstone cascades of Lechuguilla, or the gypsum flower petals of Double Bopper Cave. Incredible rock formations like these inspired John to visit more caves. But they didn't have the same thrill, the same sense of adventure, discovery, and freedom that a hike in the woods can bring. He didn't want to tour caves. He wanted to explore them, conquer them. So he decided to explore one of Tennessee's most impressive caves firsthand, without all the walkways, souvenir shops, and crowds of people. He began researching caves in the area, trying to find something that would be as awe-inspiring as the show caves he visited. He found that Tennessee has hundreds of caves, and many are spread throughout a single line. And along that line, he found the longest and deepest cave in the state. The grueling distance of Tennessee's longest cave system, the Cumberland Caverns, sprawls out across 32 miles. This cave may have been on John's list, but roughly 30 years prior, landowners stole the most impressive portions of the cave from the general splunking community and transformed much of it into another commercial cave. That's when he discovered Bull Cave. Bull Cave, sometimes called Bull's Cave, is one of many caves littered throughout Cades Cove in Tennessee. Cades Cove is a huge valley between sections of the impressive Great Smoky Mountains. In the past, the valley was a trail used by Cherokee natives, and later by John Oliver and Lorena Frazier following America's War of 1812 against the United Kingdom. Cades Cove was once covered by loose collections of silt, clay, and sandstone until massive glaciers and vast flowing waters eroded these lighter rocks down to the limestone beneath. These limestone layers are roughly 700 million years old, which gave the rock plenty of time to accumulate cave networks deep underground. This glacial runoff created hundreds of caves in and near the valley, like the famous Gregory's Cave. Gregory's might be the most popular cave in Tennessee, but Bull Cave gives it a run for its money. Bull Cave is the deepest pit in both Cades Cove and the whole state of Tennessee. Its maximum explored depth stretches down 924 feet into the cold, dark crust of the earth. Even though it's mostly a vertical cave full of dangerous climbing portions, Bull Cave is also fairly long, with 2.3 miles of dark, cramped caverns. John probably didn't love the idea of sleeping overnight in an underground passage, but he thought he could definitely handle a climb. The mountains around the area gave him plenty of opportunity to get climbing experience. He wouldn't be going to the Olympics anytime soon, but he was strong and he could hold his own through the cave's vertical shafts. On the day of his excursion, he probably gathered the usual outdoor gear: a drawstring athletics bag, a plastic water bottle, some toilet paper, trail mix, some brand new hiking shoes, and some chalk. He met up with an experienced caver who would guide him during their journey. The cave guide thought John was physically fit and capable of handling the challenge of Bull Cave. He thought the upper climbing portion was easy enough to traverse both up and down, so if they ever reached a sticking point that John couldn't overcome, he could easily just climb back up. The two trekked through the Tennessee wilderness and ducked under the rocky opening of Bull Cave. The pair connected their harnesses to anchors and metal clips in the rocky walls near Bull Cave's first drop. At the cliff, their headlamps glinted off water gently spraying from a hole several feet below them near the opposite side of the cylindrical drop. The water looked tame as it misted on the rocks below. They gazed down at the dark hole extending into the empty void beyond their sight and started to climb. Their descent was slow and methodical. John was experiencing difficulty, but he was making progress. They reached the first pitch and continued downward. As they climbed down, the water started getting heavier. John kept pushing himself harder, and they reached hundreds of feet down into the cave. But as they kept going, John was getting more uncomfortable. He wasn't expecting to get drenched, so they started to climb back up Bull Cave. Rescue below the Bull Cave waterfall. John's laundry list was all misguided, but one of his biggest mistakes might sound strange. He should have brought different shoes, and his mistake became clearer as the waterfall got heavier. Most new footwear needs time to break in. Most world-class climbers will use separate shoes for different types of rock, different types of holds, and other conditions. Almost all climbing shoes have little to no treads to create maximum surface tension with rock. Many of these shoes are also lightweight and thin-soled to help climbers feel the rock during risky technical maneuvers. That's why underwater shoes are light and flexible. Regular shoes are big and bulky, creating more surface area, which causes higher resistance underwater. John was definitely experiencing these issues. His shoes were designed for dirt and mud, not slippery limestone. Each movement took extra effort. He couldn't rely on his footing to keep him stable, so he used his arms to force himself up the rope and over each foothold. To make matters worse, his thick, insulating hiking shoes collected water, adding to their weight. Now, the additional weight won't bother people who step in rivers on hikes, but waterlogged shoes quickly become heavy during repeated movements when climbing. Even good footholds against nice, flat rock wedged into the side of the cliff became unstable as water continued pouring from above, getting stronger and faster. His athletic gear was designed to cool off when wet. That way, if it was a hot day outside, his sweat could absorb into the fabric and keep him going. It also provided good ventilation, which is a must-have for sweaty hikes. But deep below Earth's surface, his choices were coming back to bite him. The same breathable fabric provided no resistance to the water flowing over the top of him. The outside water was cooling the fabric down faster than his body could warm it up, trapping him in a tight polyester casket as he tried to climb. So many unknowing first-timers treat caves like hikes. Most of the time, well-traversed or beginner caves can be tackled without the aid of extra gear. But if the going ever gets tough, you'll wish you invested in better gear. You might get weird looks by casuals hiking through easy caves, but if disaster strikes, you'll be ready. Assuming tame caves will remain tame is a costly mistake. Thousands of lives have been lost just in recent history to exposure, cave-ins, or other mistakes that could have been prevented with the right equipment. Unfortunately, John didn't have the luxury of regret. In this moment, his fight for survival had begun. His muscles tensed as he shivered, which made each movement even harder. He had to burn energy just to stretch his muscles out to make the next movement. The stiffness in his fingers turned to rigidity as his hands betrayed him, no longer responding to his commands to grip the rope and rock. Nearly halfway up the final shaft, he hung there in place, still tethered to the rope, but unable to safely descend down to the next ledge. John's guide had to think fast. The same waters that were turning John into a human icicle were threatening to overtake him as well. He was even less prepared than John, because he was hardened by a life of splunking in dangerous corridors. The guide glanced up at the ridge above and thought of the safety, warmth, and rest it would bring. He looked down at the inexperienced caver, barely still sitting in his harness to retain tension and his position along the cave wall. If John went down, it could be disastrous for him as well. The sudden weight on the ropes could dislodge an anchor, leading into a cascade of terrible snaps and breaks, sending them both into freefall. The icy rock below would shatter them and leave them blasted by the spray of the Bull Cave waterfall. They would both surely die on impact or die in the cold long before rescuers could arrive. Even if they bounced or rolled off the cliff with only minor injuries, the water below would not save them. It was a shallow, fast-moving stream only a few feet deep, cradled by smooth limestone that slid and twisted into further passages that descended deeper into the depths. The experienced caver sat back in his harness and looked down at the rock, taking stock of the footholds and handholds. He developed a mental map of the route down to John, leaned back in his harness, and took a step back down the cliffside. After a few shaky movements, the expert closed his eyes and held his breath momentarily as water gushed over his face. He performed the next few movements with limited visibility, sometimes being forced to close his eyes while he was reaching for the next rock. The guide reached John and held on to him as they both went down to the ledge below. The guide took off some of his own gear to help John stay warm, and instructed him to keep making noise and respond when called to. The roar of the waters would make it hard to hear each other, but the guide needed to make sure John was still conscious. The guide sprinted out of Bull Cave and contacted rescue teams. He quickly went back down to the ledge and kept eyes on John, asking him to report his condition every few minutes. As the clock ticked down, the guide kept turning around to check for rescuers. Eventually, he called down to John one more time, but this time, there was no response. The guide prepped himself to go down through the waters once more and start CPR. Just as he was leaning into his harness, he looked up over the cliff edge and saw lights. The rescue team had arrived. The guide got back up as the teams began their preparations, but he kept looking down for any signs from John. More rescuers were storming out of their vehicles toward the shirtless cave guide leaning dangerously over the cliff edge underground. They asked him for the location and status of the stranded caver, but he didn't hear them. He was listening and watching down intently. As the rescuers reached out to get the experienced caver's attention, John lifted an arm in acknowledgement of the call. He was still alive. The relief jolted the guide back to reality, and he gave them the info they needed. Over 10 rescuers got to work on the operation. They lowered a water-resistant handheld radio down to John to communicate with him while they worked. They asked him questions on set intervals to monitor his condition until the team could reach him. He could only groan. But even if he couldn't reply, the sound of helpful voices might give him the strength to hang on. Rescuers knelt down to hammer more anchors into the rock so that multiple people could descend at once. One by one, a few of the rescuers trained in emergency medicine slowly climbed down the wet cliffside to reach John and provide any first aid that they could, while other teams began the rest of the work. The crew on top of the cliff affixed wheels to heavy anchors drilled into the ceiling of Bull Cave. This sheave was connected to 2 flanges as a strong, brightly colored rope was looped around the wheel to create a pulley system. The flanges grip the rope when tension is applied to create resistance that moves the wheel while also keeping tension on the rope. The team needed to add more pulleys to overcome the weight of the waterfall. The downward force of the water plus John's weight could cause the anchor to dislodge, or at the very least, it would make it harder for the rescuers to hoist John up the cliffside. They also had to account for the lightweight stretcher they brought. The rugged material could prevent cuts and punctures, but it would also hold water. That additional water could make it harder to lift the pulley, but it could also disrupt the balance of the system. The fabric of the stretcher could bow with water, allowing water to slide from side to side under John's back. This motion could cause the pulley to lose tension or swing John into the cliffside. The bowed shape could also cause the whole stretcher to shift to one side and tip over, spilling John down onto the rocky floor below. Rescuers strapped him down and looped the straps through the ridge sides of the stretcher to limit the bottom from bowing too much. With the block of pulleys affixed overhead, they slowly lifted John up to the cliffside as his lips turned blue and his face began to resemble the pale, white limestone walls of the cave. One of the medics climbed up almost in tandem with him to stay with him during the exit from Bull Cave. Once at the top of the cliff past the waterfall, the rescuers quickly split into a third team that carried him up the sloped entrance of Bull Cave and out onto the grassy forest above. It only took the team around 3 hours to rescue John. If he hadn't pushed himself to climb down as far as he did, it's possible he could have avoided this rescue completely. But thankfully, he was able to reach close to the top before his body gave out. The other rescuers who had been with him below the waterfall made their ascents, and together they cleaned up the area and gathered their gear while John was already on the way to the roadside where a helicopter awaited him. John was airlifted to the University of Tennessee Medical Center to regain his body heat and monitor him for signs of injury. Sometime after this incident, Bull Cave was closed to the public, and it remains closed to this day. John ended up with no significant injuries, and supposedly John took a long break from caving to bolster his skills and appreciate the safety of life on the surface. Today's story was a two-sided coin. John learned a valuable life lesson and survived the icy waterfall of Bull Cave unscathed, but other cavers are now barred from entry. Have you ever witnessed one of these majestic and terrible underground waterfalls firsthand? Along a remote stretch of coastline, more than 100 miles away from the capital city of Santo Domingo, El Dudu Lagoon is one of the finest natural attractions in the Dominican Republic. Visitors can enjoy swimming in fresh water, leaping off rocks, and even zooming across a zip line that covers the lagoon. But El Dudu is more than just an easygoing outdoor attraction. If you happen to dunk your head under the water, you'll see that the lagoon goes as deep as 66 feet. Not only that, but in its depths, the lagoon also hides a network of caves. Speleologists travel far and wide to this corner of the island so they can explore these daunting subterranean labyrinths. Sometimes, this ends in disaster. In February of 2019, the world got a startling glimpse of just how disastrous that can be, when two experienced divers from Italy dove confidently into the darkness beneath El Dudu Lagoon and never returned. In this video, we'll explore the horrifying demise of two divers, Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri, and study first-hand accounts from the rescue team to try and work out what really happened on that fateful day deep below the lush forest floor of the Dominican Republic. The event. On February 9th, 2019, at around 11:45 a.m., 57-year-old Carlos Barbieri and 44-year-old Carlos Basso entered the cave system beneath the waters of El Dudu Lagoon. Both were diving enthusiasts visiting from Italy. Despite having earned a reputation for doing dangerous cave dives around the world, neither man was diving certified. Ed Sorensen, who ended up working on their rescue mission, recalls hearing that an instructor in Italy had recently told Carlos Basso that he should consider getting proper training, to which Basso allegedly replied, quote, "There is nothing you could teach me that I don't already know." Now, whether Basso actually said this or not, it seems likely that it represents both his and Barbieri's attitudes. Without the proper certification, training, or all the necessary gear, both men plunged into the caves beneath El Dudu Lagoon, brimming with confidence from all their past successes. The underwater world which awaited them was something to behold. After descending deep into the lagoon itself, the pair would have eventually reached the mouth of the cave system. After navigating through some narrow passageways, and right past a highly conspicuous warning sign, the cave system begins to open up. A huge tunnel, full of pillars, stalagmites, and stalactites, winds even further and further into the bowels of the earth. Further on, the two reached a room in which there is actually an air pocket. Divers can swim up and emerge from the surface of the water to breathe fresh air, despite being located far below the surface of the lagoon where the journey began. The cave system winds and descends much, much further than this. Ambitious divers, which Basso and Barbieri both certainly were, can swim for a total of 45 minutes before finally reaching the end of the cave system. Much of the rest of the journey is significantly narrower and more cramped than the beginning. Unusually, the end of the line in El Dudu actually leads up to an alternative exit different from the place you entered. Called Cueva de Lili, divers exiting the cave via this route can expect to see bats, tarantulas, scorpions, and snakes. But whether they had planned on braving the creepy critters or not, Carlos Barbieri and Carlos Basso never made it there. The search. By mid-afternoon, the pair had still not re-emerged from the water. That's when word traveled to Philip Lehman. Lehman is the vice president of the Dominican Republic Speleological Society, or DRSS. Concerned, Lehman enlisted the help of a colleague named Angel Compres, and together the pair traveled to El Dudu. At the time, neither Lehman nor Compres knew what part of the cave system to look in. All they knew was that 2 divers were inside somewhere, and they were probably in trouble. This was a daunting task, given how vast El Dudu is. The first thing Lehman and Compres noticed upon entering the water was that a lot of silt had been stirred up. These fine particles can reduce visibility in underwater spaces to such a degree that it can be literally impossible to see anything in certain areas. This was obviously a hamper to their search, but it was also a clue. Silt can often be a factor or even a direct cause of many diving accidents. Working on this hunch, the pair were soon joined by El Dudu management and the local authorities from Cabrera, the town El Dudu was located in. The search team cleverly used the silt as a guide, figuring where there was more silt, there was probably a higher chance of the 2 divers. By following this trail of stirred-up silt, they eventually found a narrow passageway with very low visibility. Here, the search team found a broken guideline. This was a telltale sign that a serious accident had taken place. Unfortunately, using the silt as a map to the diver's location was a double-edged sword. Even though it led them to their first major clue, the visibility was so bad that they soon had to temporarily call off the search. The next day, the search team tried again, but visibility remained terrible and nothing was found. This continued for several days, with still no sign of either Carlos Barbieri or Carlos Basso. Then, finally, days after Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri had gone missing, the team made their first gruesome discovery. The body of 57-year-old Carlos Barbieri was found in a side passage. He was caught, and caught so badly that even though they'd found him, the team was unable to recover his body at the time. According to the National Speleological Society, this side passage is very narrow and is usually only attempted by divers using side-mount gear. Barbieri didn't bring side-mount gear. Following the discovery of Carlos Barbieri, more than a week went by with virtually no progress. At this point, they decided it was time to call in additional help. That's when Mike Young and internationally renowned rescue diver Ed Sorensen were called out to the Dominican Republic. The rescue. The heroic arrival of experts Ed Sorensen and Mike Young were interrupted in transit by an unexpected setback. Upon arriving at the border of the Dominican Republic, local authorities told the 2 men they weren't allowed into the country. This, while Carlos Barbieri's body remained lodged in the side passage, and Carlos Basso remained missing in the depths of the El Dudu cave system. In a report later published by the National Speleological Society, the reason for this is sort of strange. Apparently, the government was not only aware of the diving accident, but aware of the fact that the rescue mission was ongoing, and had been for well over a week. But they were wary of letting 2 American rescue divers in to help, because they assumed if it had taken this long already, the operation must have been way too dangerous. After some hasty negotiations, and maybe showing the local authorities his track record, Ed Sorensen and his partner Mike Young were allowed into the Dominican Republic. However, they were allowed in on one condition. They only had 8 days to recover both bodies. After 8 days, the authorities would call off the search for good. Recounting the story later, Sorensen describes how he brought special harnesses with which to extract the bodies. These harnesses were designed to wrap around at numerous different points on the body, for the horrific reason that, after being trapped and submerged for so many days, they may not come out in one piece. Due to the silt and the labyrinth-like nature of the cave system, Sorensen describes how he explored the cave. He held onto his guideline with one hand and held his other hand out in front of him, essentially feeling around for things that weren't made out of sand, water, or rock.
He says he found the still-trapped body of Carlos Barbieri by literally bumping into him. Sorensen couldn't extract the body on his own, so he sent for the local crew to bring down a bunch of milk crates full of weights. These weights helped pull Barbieri's body down just enough to maneuver it out from under the section of the passage he was stuck in. Finally, after about 4 hours of grueling work, the deceased Barbieri had been recovered. But even now, nobody knew where the body of the younger Carlos Basso was. The day after the exhausting recovery of Carlos Barbieri, Ed Sorensen and Mike Young headed back into the cave. They continued their search in the same area, venturing slowly deeper into the very furthest depths of El Dudu. Sorensen actually reached a wall at the very back of the passageway before he found the body of Carlos Basso. Basso was down in a crevice. In order to reach him, Sorensen had to let go of the guideline. He held on to Mike Young, who held on to the guideline for both of them, while he worked with one hand to try and recover the body of Carlos Basso. Unlike the first body, this time Sorensen was able to extract the body without additional help. However, due to the extreme depths at which the body was found, the whole recovery again took approximately 4 hours. The aftermath. Even though there are some clear red flags in their story, to this day, authorities still don't know conclusively what went wrong with Carlos Barbieri and Carlos Basso. Overconfidence, and the fact that both men lacked proper training and proper equipment surely played a role, but the specific events that transpired to lead to their grisly demise remain the subject of speculation. The report of the incident done by the National Speleological Society speculates that as they were nearing the end of their air supply, one of the men, either Basso or Barbieri, got tangled in the line and broke it, making them unable to find their way out. Another theory put forward is that they mistakenly began following a jump line, a different line left behind by other divers thinking it was their own. Either way, the report stresses that neither Basso nor Barbieri should have been in El Dudu in the first place, especially so deep. Not only did their lack of certification and equipment result in their own deaths, but it also left their bodies in an insane situation that put the lives of the rescue workers at risk as well. In the end, like other tragic tales of divers meeting their demise, Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri serve today as a cautionary tale for divers of all experience levels to never overestimate their abilities. As the saying goes, the wolf is always at the door. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Tell us, provided you had the proper equipment and proper training, would you consider exploring the caves in El Dudu? Or would you rather stick to riding the zip line on the surface? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and please be sure to like the video and subscribe for more content like this in the near future. That's all for now. See you next time.